Hello, everybody. And my name is Kate Stearns, and I was one of the jurors this year for the QWF Literary Awards. I sat on the jury for the Mavis Gallant Prize for Nonfiction, and it is my great pleasure at the moment to be speaking with this year's winner, Grescoe, who won for his marvelous book, Possess the Air. So we're just going to talk a little bit about it. Taras, I would be vastly preferring to be raising a glass at the bar and bending your ear. The only two forms of exercise I find are acceptable, but we're going to be we're going to be doing it this way. So I just want to start by asking you, really, the book has such an admirable range, in a way, of subject matter, although of course it's all tied into Mussolini and that period in which he was rising. But I'm curious the point of entry for you into this book. What was there a single sort of fact or a single sort of idea that you wanted to get across? What started you on the journey for this book?
It was sort of a heaven and hell type thing. I mean, heaven for me is the city of Rome, and getting to know Rome. I actually went there. I was remembering. I went there for the first time. I think it was like 1999 or 2000, and National Geographic sent me there. Called me up with a week's notice and said, "Do you want to go to Rome and follow in the footsteps of Gregory Peck in Roman Holiday?"
Nice.
I'd just gone through a bad breakup. It was February in Montreal, and I was like, yes, I'd love to go. And somehow, like, I was heartbroken at the time and seriously depressed, I think. And Rome, within a week, snapped me out of that. And I became eternally grateful to the Eternal City.
Eternal City.
But I was fascinated and after that, I went back several times. But I was always fascinated by the fact that Rome, there were so many traces of what was clearly a hellish period, the period of fascism, because the fascists were in power for a long time in Italy, as opposed to in Germany, where the Nazis only had a few years to remake the country. The traces of the fascist past are everywhere in Rome. And I was intrigued by that. So clearly this kind of hell had come to the city that I associated with paradise for so many reasons. And the Romantic poets had associated with paradise and turned into a paradise, this kind of fallen paradise, of course. And meanwhile, I started writing this, coming up with the idea in about 2016, around the time Trump was elected. So I realized we were entering a hellish period again. And I've been deeply concerned about the rise of authoritarianism around the world, in Brazil, in Turkey, in India, in our neighbors to the south, the United States. So it seemed timely. It was very much on my mind. It was clear we were entering into a dark period of our history. And Rome seemed like this beautiful backdrop against which to explore this sort of rising tide. What turned this into a story for me was the discovery of Lauro de Bossis, who is the poet aviator who is at the core of this story. He had an American mother, an Italian father. His father was the leading translator of Shelley, so he was very much immersed in this sort of romantic conception of what Italy was and what Rome was, and devoted to these sort of aristocratic and 19th century ideals of chivalry, but also of democracy. And it seemed like a very poignant way to discuss the nightmarish rise of fascism in Italy. And I'm a writer who really likes to grapple with a place. So I went to Rome a couple of more times, and tracked down all of its homes and haunts, went to the archives, the Archivio Nazionale dello Stato, where his papers are kept, or the papers documenting Italian state's reaction to him. So yeah, it was my way of re-engaging with Rome, but also engaging with what's going on in the world right now, which was deeply concerning to me.
Well,
Right.
I mean, yeah, and I mean, as you're bringing this up, I mean, it strikes me. I'm wondering if you feel that, because of course this is a conversation that's also going around worldwide. If you feel like Rome in particular, perhaps Italy in general, but Rome in particular, has had a better grasp on contextualizing their history. That is to say, not simply trying to erase it, because as you say, we're coming back to these positions, these dictators or these nationalists, these populists. So in other words, were you feeling like Rome's history allowed you to bring both the good and the bad together in a way that helped you make sense of it, rather than, for example, say, trying to tear down the past that is uncomfortable for us?
Well, the interesting thing about Rome, of course, is that the past is everywhere, and Romans coexist with their past. Of course, they have the Roman ruins, the Forum all around them. They can stroll past them every day. They have the remains of the Baroque city, the remains of the Renaissance city, the remains of the 19th century city, which Mussolini did his best to erase, and the fascist city as well. That for me is the most disturbing thing, the fact that so many of the symbols of fascist Rome still stand. There's a Lauro de Bossis piazza. Mm. There's a little sign saying Lauro de Bossis, but I went there. It's on the banks of the Tiber River, and there's a 30-meter tall obelisk that says Mussolini ducks, which hasn't been torn down, right? Yes. It's Carrara marble. You can find, the fascist eagles all over the place. They haven't, that's the interesting thing, which is why it makes it such an intriguing place-based story to grapple with, because everything is still there. Everything is all around, which is at the same time disturbing, but it's a gold mine for a writer of nonfiction.
Yes, and also it reminds us that these things have happened and can happen again. And of course, we're grappling with that. Is it the statue that is this how you literally encountered Lauro de Bossis? I was very dismayed with myself for not having known anything about him. So I was enchanted by him.
Yeah, so Lauro de Bossis, as I said, he was this poet aviator. Came up with this. It was initially a little he was skeptical about fascism, but he was also sort of understood where it came from. And he, like a lot of people, he was like, well, Mussolini, a former socialist, could be interesting. But he very quickly became disenchanted. And he went to the United States and unwittingly became part of the selling of fascism to the American people. Mm-hmm. And this book really deals a lot with that, how Americans, North Americans, the British, abetted Mussolini. And they were doing it in a lot of cases because he was seen as a bulwark against communism, right? So the Americans were saying, well, he may be anti-democratic, but he's a strong man, and he's keeping the Italian people need this kind of thing. This is the kind of discourse that you hear about, that, to my dismay, seems to became quite common with Trump. And I wanted to grapple with that too, how this slide into authoritarianism happens. So Lauro, after becoming sort of this unwitting apologist for fascism, remakes himself into one of the great protesters against fascism. He's not well known now, But he was well known and considered a hero. There were squadrons, Allied squadrons named after him in the Second World War, RAF squadrons. There was, battalions in the Spanish Civil War that were named after him. He was a hero, and he's a very specific kind of hero because he realized that the fascists could not be combated, fought against at the level of violence because they could always deploy incredible violence. That was their specialty. And that's where people like the Rosselli brothers, the communist objectors, the communist resistance to fascism failed. And ultimately they were assassinated because the fascists were really good at deploying violence. Lauro de Bosas decided to do this on the level of ideas, and that's where he triumphed. And that's why I consider him an inspiration and a story that
poetic gesture. Yeah, the poetic gesture that he made, which is quite extraordinary. And I don't want to spoil it for people who are going to buy the book, and you absolutely should buy this book because it is amazing. But you do recreate his poetic gesture quite wonderfully, and I'm curious as to and again, where's the intersection for you, because this almost reads like a novel in places, and it has that sense of pace, and it has that sense of these gripping characters, even though they're historical. Thornton Wilder comes in, and various journalists from the Chicago Daily. Wonderful. So you think, oh, I know them, but you make me feel as though they are part of a story. So I'm wondering for you, where it won for the Nonfiction Prize, but where for you is the intersection between, facts and making sure those facts get across, but also making it so that people are gripped by it? What's your sort of way into that?
Yeah, that's the great challenge, of course. This is a form known as, that I like to call narrative nonfiction. I really work hard on the documentation. So going back to the archives, going back to newspaper reports, going back to journals. I went to Harvard, I went to Trent University, because there's another character for these Canadian archaeologists, whose story I tell, the Banyanis. I went, you mentioned the journalists, people like George Seldes, for example, who wrote the great book Sawdust Caesar, this great hatchet job on Mussolini. They wrote the first draft of history, and it was often quite vivid. And I really value it because they lived these things. They were foreign correspondents in Rome at the time, and they have these they really bring it home. So in a lot of cases, I relied on their eyewitness accounts to make this story sing, to make it to read like a novel, rather than just a dry recitation of facts. And that was always the challenge. But it is such a great story. Basically, this is all leading up to this poetic gesture of Lauro de Bosas, who teaches himself to fly a small plane and decides to bombard Mussolini's palazzo in 1931. So it all leads up to that. So I think there's this sort of nice dramatic tension, which is almost novelistic. There's the mystery of what happened to Lauro afterwards. And against all of this, there's my own sort of fascination with urbanism and how ideology is inscribed into the urban landscape, how we live with the past, and how if we don't grapple with those symbols, if we don't acknowledge them, put them into context, history can repeat itself. And what I'm really afraid of today, because we're discussing this on the day when the American election is being decided, and so many things are going on in the world. My fear is that, and Remembrance Day is coming up, is that a generation is forgetting these lessons. What our parents and grandparents fought against, the tyrants that were fought against. We're really losing the memory of this, which is one reason that I thought this story, which really takes place 100 years ago now, needed to be told again as vividly as possible.
Well, it really is incredibly prescient, because even just talking about journalism and what journalists can at their best provide us, which is this eyewitness account of history. And as you say, the urban landscape, including memorials that are not always to people we need to admire, but people we need to remember and understand, so that we perhaps don't memorialize them all over again. So just before I let you go back to your world, I'm just curious, because there's such a massive, wonderful research that goes on. How much do you retain after a book like this? I mean, you must be an expert when you're in the midst of it. What sort of sticks back? What sticks in you? What do you think will stick in your mind forever, no matter what other books start to crowd out your imagination of the research that you did?
Well, you know what? I've been teaching myself Italian. I had to, and I'm continuing that process. And I see a future after the COVID times of many happy returns to Italy. It's a country I love. What remains? I mean, just
Well, your
all of
love of Italy clearly is going to remain, and the language, and that's a beautiful memorial to a wonderful, wonderful book. Finally, you didn't get a chance to get up and say what you might have liked to have said to a group of admirers at the gala, wonderful as it was. And so I'd like to offer you the opportunity to say whatever you might want to say at this moment.
Well, first of all, I have to thank the Quebec Writers Federation, which does such an amazing job of supporting writers in a lot of different ways, not just through the awards, but through mentorship and so many other things. It's just I mean, they really punch above their weight in providing a sense of community and support for writers in Quebec. But to tell you the truth, I did make a speech, because my two kids, I made a thank you speech to my two boys, Desmond and Victor. Desmond is 9 years old, Victor is 4 years old. The book is dedicated to Victor, who was born in 2016, just as I started writing the book. And I thanked them for their forbearance and their support, and all the days when Dad came home grumpy from his research in the office and his research trips, because he'd been immersed in this rather dark time in history. And I thank them for cheering me up and to giving me the force to continue. And also to Erin, my wife, who saw me through the long dark Novembers of the soul that come when you're writing a book like this.
Well, that's a lovely tribute, and I'm sure that your children will be extremely proud. I don't imagine they're ready to read the book yet, but when they are, they'll have a real treat in store for them. Thank you so much, Terrace. Possess the Air, this now award-winning book, first of many, I would assume, from the QWF, is available for sale. I do want to make that clear. And as a sponsor of this year's prizes, Montreal's Paragraph Bookstore has a special section on their website dedicated to the QWF Literary Awards, with all titles available and at a discount, which is Christmas come early. So please visit www.paragraphbooks.com to place your orders. And to find out more about the other winners of this year's QWF Literary Awards, please visit qwf.org. Thank you, Terrace, very much for your time and for the wonderful book, and thank you all for watching.